The talking donkey. You expect God to speak through prophets, through visions, through angels, but a donkey, in one of the strangest moments in Scripture, a donkey actually speaks. Numbers 22:28 says, "Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, 'What have I done to you? Why are you hitting me?'" A donkey, talking, and here's the wild part. Balaam just answers her, like it's normal. But let's rewind. Here's the backstory. Balaam was a prophet for hire, a spiritual gun for rent. When the king of Moab saw Israel coming, he panicked and hired Balaam to curse them. God said, "Don't go," then later allowed him, on strict terms. But Balaam's heart, it wasn't obedience, it was greed. So on his way to meet the king, God sends an angel, sword drawn, to block his path. Balaam doesn't see the angel, but the donkey does. 3 times she swerves, stops, even lays down. And each time, Balaam beats her in anger. Finally, God opens her mouth, and she speaks. It's funny, it's absurd, but it's also painfully revealing. The prophet, the man who claims to see, is blind to God's presence. Meanwhile, the donkey, the animal Balaam sees as dumb beneath him, sees perfectly. That's the reversal. God takes what Balaam dismisses and uses it to save his life. And here's the lesson. God isn't bound by our expectations. He'll use the unexpected. He'll humble the proud. He'll take what seems foolish and shame the wise. Finally, God opens Balaam's eyes. Now he sees the angel, sword in hand. And Balaam bows low, realizing he's been fighting against God this whole time. The warning is clear. Spiritual authority means nothing if your heart isn't aligned with Him, and sometimes the very voices we dismiss, the people we think are beneath us, are the ones God uses to wake us up. So, yeah, it's a talking donkey, but it's more than that. It's a prophetic rebuke wrapped in absurdity, a reminder that God's voice can show up anywhere, even through the mouth of a beast. The bridegroom of blood. It's one of the strangest moments in the Bible, and it comes out of nowhere. Moses is on his way back to Egypt, ready to confront Pharaoh. God has just appeared in the burning bush. He's got the staff, the mission, the calling, everything is set. And then suddenly, God tries to kill him. Exodus 4:24 says, "At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death." No explanation, no warning, just divine wrath. And what saves Moses? Not a sword, not a miracle, not even a prayer, but a flint knife in the hands of his wife. Zipporah steps in. She circumcises their son, touches Moses' feet with the bloody foreskin, and yes, feet is likely a euphemism for genitals. Then she says, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," and the Lord lets Moses live. It's bizarre, it's violent, it's confusing. But here's what's going on. Moses, the chosen deliverer of Israel, hadn't circumcised his own son. And that wasn't just a small oversight. It was a failure to obey the foundational sign of God's covenant with Abraham. Circumcision wasn't optional. It was the mark of belonging to God's people. God had just commissioned Moses to lead his covenant people out of slavery. But Moses hadn't even upheld the covenant in his own home. This moment is a warning. You can't lead spiritually if you ignore God privately. It's also a powerful picture of intercession, because notice, Moses doesn't act, Zipporah does. She takes the knife. She performs the rite. She applies the blood. She saves her husband's life. In that moment, she becomes the stand-in for obedience. It's messy, it's raw, but it's deeply theological. This passage reminds us God takes His covenants seriously, and He expects His leaders to do the same. And it shows us that faith isn't just about public power plays, it's about private obedience. Sometimes the ones closest to us are the very ones who hold us accountable to God's commands. So, yes, it's strange, it's bloody, it's unsettling. But it's also a reminder you can't skip obedience and still expect to walk in calling. Ezekiel's vision of wheels. If you've ever opened the book of Ezekiel and thought, "What in the world am I reading?" you're not alone. Chapter 1 doesn't ease you in, it throws you straight into the deep end. Storm clouds, fire, 4-faced creatures, spinning wheels covered in eyes. Ezekiel 1:15-16 says, "Now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures. Their appearance and structure was like a wheel intersecting a wheel, and then it gets weirder. These creatures have 4 faces: human, lion, ox, eagle. They move without turning. Lightning flashes from them. The wheels spin in every direction, and they're covered in eyes. Above them, a gleaming throne. And above the throne, a figure like that of a man, radiating glory and fire. It's the kind of vision that makes you stop and wonder, is this prophecy or sci-fi? But here's the thing. It's not supposed to be easy to picture. It's not supposed to be normal. This vision is intentionally overwhelming because it's describing something that breaks every human category: the presence of God in exile. Ezekiel was a priest. He'd been taken captive to Babylon. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple, the one place where God's glory was supposed to dwell, was gone. So everyone thought God was gone too, left behind in the rubble. But then this vision in Babylon, in exile, far from the temple, and it's world-shattering. God wasn't gone. He hadn't been defeated. He was mobile, sovereign, unstoppable. Those wheels within wheels, they weren't random. They symbolized movement in every direction, without limitation. The eyes covering them, God sees everything. Nothing escapes him. And those strange creatures, they're part of his heavenly throne, the chariot of his glory, ready to move wherever he wills. This was Ezekiel's burning bush moment, but cranked to 11. And it came right when God's people felt abandoned. This vision was God's way of saying, I'm not stuck in your temple. I'm not bound by your geography. I'm still here. I still reign. It's strange. It's intense. But it's not random. It's a vision that wakes you up, that recenters your theology, because God is not small, God is not local, and he doesn't need a building to show up. Even in exile, even in chaos, his throne is never empty. Lot's wife turns to salt. Some stories end with a whisper. This one ends with a statue. As fire rains down on Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his family are told to flee. Don't look back. But in a single, haunting moment, one person does. Genesis 19:26. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Just like that. Frozen in place. A monument to disobedience. It feels sudden, harsh. Why such a severe consequence for just turning her head? Because this wasn't a glance. It was a gaze, a longing, a heart still tethered to the place God had judged. Lot's wife didn't just break a rule, she revealed her loyalty. Her body was moving toward safety, but her soul was still in Sodom. And that's the deeper danger. Sodom wasn't just a wicked city, it represented a life built on comfort, on compromise, on rebellion against God. And when judgment came, she couldn't let it go. She turned, not out of curiosity, but out of attachment. And that attachment became her undoing. Jesus later brings this back into focus. In Luke 17:32, he says, "Remember Lot's wife." One of the shortest commands in Scripture, but one of the sharpest. You can't follow God while looking over your shoulder at the life he's calling you out of. And her transformation into salt? Not random, not meaningless. Salt preserves. Her death becomes a permanent reminder, a frozen testimony that half-hearted obedience is still disobedience. The message is painfully clear. When God calls you out of darkness, don't bring your affections with you. Don't long for what he's rescued you from. Don't hesitate. When it's time to run, Lot's wife wasn't judged for loving her family. She was judged for loving the world more than God. And her story still speaks, thousands of years later. Not with words, but with silence. A pillar of salt, standing where faith froze mid-step. It's not just a punishment, it's a mirror and a message. Don't look back. Jesus writes in the sand. It's one of the most mysterious moments in the Gospels, and one of the quietest power moves Jesus ever made. The scene opens in John 8. A woman, caught in adultery, is dragged into the temple courts. The religious leaders throw her before Jesus and say, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act. The law of Moses commands us to stone her. What do you say?" John 8:5. But this isn't really about justice. It's a trap. Verse 6 says it plainly. They said this to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And what does Jesus do? He stoops down and starts writing in the dirt with his finger. No rebuttal, no defense, no debate, just silence. And scribbling. It's the only time in the Gospels we're told that Jesus ever wrote anything, and John doesn't even tell us what he wrote. The detail is left hanging, which means it's not about the content, it's about the act itself. Because to a Jewish audience, the finger of God writing something should sound familiar. Exodus 31:18, God gave Moses the tablets of the law, written with the finger of God. The 10 Commandments weren't just spoken, they were carved by divine hand. So when Jesus bends down and writes in the dust, he's not dodging the law, he's embodying it, as if to say, you're quoting the law to me, I'm the one who wrote it. Then comes the twist. He stands and says, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." John 8:7. And then he stoops down again, keeps writing, one by one. The accusers drop their stones and walk away. Notice this. Jesus never denies her guilt. He never argues technicalities. Instead, he shifts the spotlight. The ones eager to expose her sin now have to face their own. And Jesus, the true lawgiver, chooses mercy. He looks at her and says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." John 8:11. This isn't Jesus versus the law. This is the author of the law revealing its true purpose, not to destroy the guilty, but to lead them to grace. healing with spit and mud. John 9:6. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and anointed the man's eyes with the mud. Think about that. Jesus could have healed with a word. He could have touched the man's eyes. He could have simply said, "Be healed." But instead, he spits in the dirt, makes mud, rubs it on the man's face. Why? At first glance, it feels unnecessary, even unsanitary. But nothing Jesus does is random. This moment is full of meaning. First, look at who this is for. A man born blind. A man the religious leaders called cursed. Surely he sinned. Or his parents did. To them, he was a theological problem, an outcast. But to Jesus, he wasn't a problem. He was an opportunity to reveal the works of God. And here's the mystery. By spitting and making mud, Jesus isn't just healing, he's recreating. Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Man was made from mud. So when Jesus kneels down, mixes spit with dirt, and presses it onto blind eyes, he's doing what only the Creator can do. He's reaching back to the beginning, back to the first act of life. And he's doing it again. The blind man isn't just gaining sight, he's becoming a new creation. And notice the method. In that culture, saliva was considered unclean. The last thing you'd expect God to use for something holy. But that's the point. Jesus takes what's considered unclean, and he turns it into healing. That's the gospel. It shows us this. God doesn't need sanitized conditions to work miracles. He steps into the mess, uses the unexpected, brings light to places everyone else gave up on. Then comes the test. After applying the mud, Jesus tells the man, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." And he does. Simple obedience after an unusual command. And that's often how faith works. The miracle comes after the messy step. So yes, it's a strange miracle, but it's also a powerful one. Because in just a handful of mud, Jesus reveals himself as the one who made us and the one who can make us new. Elisha and the she-bears. It's one of the most shocking stories in the Old Testament. A group of young people mock a prophet, and 2 bears come out of the woods and tear 42 of them apart. Seriously? 2 Kings 2:23-24 tells it this way. Elisha is traveling to Bethel. Some youths come out and mock him, shouting, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" Elisha turns around, curses them in the name of the Lord, and suddenly 2 female bears charge out of the forest and maul dozens of them. It sounds extreme. Overkill even, all for some name-calling, but this wasn't just kids teasing an old man, and it definitely wasn't about hair loss. To understand what's really happening, you have to look closer at who Elisha was, and what those mockers were actually saying. Elisha had just inherited the mantle of Elijah, Israel's most famous prophet. Elijah had been taken into heaven in a whirlwind, publicly. So when they shouted, "Go up," it wasn't random. They were taunting Elisha to prove himself. If you're really a prophet like Elijah, why don't you go up to heaven too? In other words, they weren't mocking his appearance. They were mocking his calling. They were rejecting the legitimacy of God's chosen messenger, and by extension, they were rejecting God himself. And that matters, because in ancient Israel, prophets weren't just religious teachers. They were God's voice on earth. To scorn a prophet wasn't just disrespect, it was rebellion. And notice where this happens. Bethel, a city that had become a hotbed of idol worship, a culture where mocking God's messenger wasn't unusual, it was normal. So those youths, they were shaped by that culture, and their words revealed their hearts. The bears, then, weren't just wild animals. They were instruments of judgment, not for teasing, but for contempt. This story isn't about a thin-skinned prophet with a temper. It's about a holy God who defends his name, and the ones he calls, especially when they stand alone in hostile places. It's a warning. Mocking what's sacred isn't harmless. It might sound like a joke on the surface, but it reveals something deeper, and God sees that. The folded burial cloth. Sometimes the most powerful signs don't come in thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come in something as simple as a folded napkin. On resurrection morning, Peter and John run to the tomb. John arrives first, stoops down and sees the linen wrappings. Then Peter walks in and notices something odd. John 27. And the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head was not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Folded. Separate, intentional. It's a tiny detail, easy to miss, but for anyone familiar with Jewish custom, it spoke volumes. In first-century households, there was a well-known tradition around dining. When a master was finished eating, he would crumple his napkin and toss it aside. That signaled the meal was over. The servant could clear the table. But if the master folded his napkin and placed it neatly, it meant something entirely different. I'm not done. I'm coming back. So when Peter saw that folded cloth, it wasn't just proof Jesus had risen, it was a message. Jesus left the tomb not in chaos, but with purpose. Not in haste, but with calm authority. And the folded cloth? It whispered what the angels would later shout, "He's not here." But he's not done either. The resurrection wasn't just an escape from death, it was the start of something new. Jesus wasn't hiding, he was preparing to appear to Mary, to the disciples, to Thomas, and eventually, to the world. And in the smallest of gestures, a neatly folded cloth, he gave us a hint that his story wasn't over, that he had more to do, more to say, and one day he would return. So don't miss it. Sometimes God hides his messages in plain sight. Simple, but deeply intentional. And this one is clear. Jesus rose and he's coming back. The Bible is full of strange moments, talking animals, blinding lights, bizarre rituals, heavenly visions, even spit and mud. But none of it is meaningless. Every odd detail, every strange symbol, every unexpected act carries a deeper message. These aren't just weird stories, they're warnings, they're reminders, they're revelations. They show us who God is, holy, sovereign, merciful, and they show us who we are when we resist or when we respond. Sometimes what looks like chaos on the surface is really God pulling back the curtain on something eternal. Whether it's a folded cloth, a fiery chariot, or a whisper in the sand, God is speaking. The question is, are we listening? If this video helped you see these stories in a new light, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Bible breakdowns like this. And hey, got another weird Bible moment you want explained? Drop it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. And remember, the Bible doesn't just inform, it transforms, even the strange parts. Thanks for watching.